Today I'd like to talk about the third conditional and to give you some tips on how to practice it. So why might we use the third conditional? Well, normally to express a regret or to complain about something that happened in the past, or to talk about something that didn't happen and imagine or invent different actions and outcomes. And what's the grammar for the third conditional? Well, it's if plus a past perfect, followed by would, have and the past participle. Or we can change that around and say would, have, past participle, if, and then the past perfect. If you want to be more advanced, you can invert the past perfect, so an inverted past perfect, would plus have and the past participle, and if we want to talk about possibility, we can change would for could or might. So what does that look like in practice? Well, if we think about a situation and an outcome, in my case I became a teacher in 1990 and the outcome or the result was that I moved to Madrid. Now if we imagine that situation slightly differently, if we imagine that I never became a teacher, so if I hadn't become a teacher, then I wouldn't have come to Madrid and I would have gone to London. So let's look at examples of this. So if I hadn't become a teacher, I would have gone to London. We can change that around. I would have gone to London if I hadn't become a teacher. We can use the inversion. Had I not become a teacher, I would have gone to London. And we can talk about possibility. If I hadn't become a teacher, I could have gone to London, or I might have gone to London. So this is fairly easy to use if you have to use it once, but if you have to repeat several third conditionals in a row, it might be a little bit complicated. Or sometimes when you're speaking and you have to use the third conditional suddenly, again it can be a little bit complicated. So how can you practice this? Well, you can think of situations and outcomes and imagine them differently using the third conditional. So as I said, I became a teacher, the outcome was I moved to Madrid, and the reality of my situation was that I was a teacher in Madrid. But before becoming a teacher, I had spent some time in Australia, and I thought that when I became a teacher, maybe I would go to Japan, study Japanese, and use my knowledge to try and emigrate to Australia. So if we imagine that a little bit differently, then we can say, if I hadn't become a teacher, I would have gone to Japan. And then if I had gone to Japan, I would have learnt Japanese. If I had learnt to speak Japanese, I would have been able to easily emigrate to Australia. So when you're thinking of your situations and outcomes to practice this, maybe you want to think about what you studied, maybe about your first job, or maybe about a decision that you made in the past. Now if you imagine those things differently, if we talk about your studies, what might have happened? If you had studied something different, would you have chosen a different job? What would have happened? Would you have earned more or less? What about your job? If you had decided not to work, or if you had chosen a different job, maybe you might have traveled more. And if you had traveled more, maybe you would have written a blog and become a famous blogger. Then finally, for example, if we talk about decisions, if you made a decision, a different decision, would you have had a different path to take? If you had taken a different path, what would have been the final outcome? So think of situations and imagine the consequences if you had taken different decisions. Use the third conditionals, practice it, and practice it, and in the end it becomes easy.